are back, and we are joined now by Dan O'Sullivan, co-host of The Outfit, a podcast about how organized crime explains America. Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Emma. Love the show.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I am fascinated right now. I've been thinking a little bit about like the FBI, the CIA connections, and somewhat to the mafia in history, to mobsters, their roles in trying to pull them into assassination plots against Castro, and also just like generally the McCarthy era, given what we are living through right now.
Yeah.
How, in your kind of study of some of these mobsters, do you see some shadings of history repeating itself in the current moment, if at all?
I mean, it's a great question, and we can really, it's interesting how many aspects of mob history we can sort of pick and choose from to talk about the current moment with Donald Trump. I mean, we have Trump the builder and his father, who are literally, were built up with the Mafia construction rackets, partnered with them in New York, going back to the early 50s. Then we have the modern day sort of gangsterism with Trump, the crypto deals, the shady money flowing in from overseas into places like Panama and Germany, where Trump is part of this really modern kind of global criminal financial market. So, but you hit upon quite a relevant one now in terms of, well, for a long time, J. Edgar Hoover said there was no mafia in America, right?
Mm-hmm.
And instead was focusing his energies on suspected communists. And I think we're seeing some similar things happen where just the most venal types of corruption and crime are obviously completely ignored in favor of going after, what some college student said about Gaza or, obviously what comedians are saying on television, right? And interestingly, even though there's definitely precedent for that in how the FBI and authorities approach things, I also see a lot of reminiscent behavior of extortion, of protection rackets, of labor racketeering. And I find that really interesting because I think Trump maybe models himself very vivid, very obviously on those tactics.
Roy Cohn was his mentor. Like, if we're talking about the McCarthy era, Roy Cohn is, and there was a piece in Rolling Stone that I covered yesterday about Stephen Miller and how much of a role he plays in the administration. And he's been referred to as Trump's Roy Cohn. I think Trump in the article, I may be misremembering, may have said, he's my Roy Cohn or something like that, or people around him. I'm paraphrasing. Either way, the parallels are clear. And Cohn's connections as a mafia lawyer are fascinating when you when you tease this out. And obviously a virulent anti-communist McCarthyite who bragged about executing the Rosenbergs.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a fascinating thing. So obviously Roy Cohn was chief counsel to the Senate subcommittee of Joseph McCarthy that was responsible for a lot of the Red Scare. He was chief counsel on the Army McCarthy hearings. But he also, in later life, as was depicted in the movie The Apprentice, was not just Donald Trump's lawyer, but lawyer to, depending on the source, either 2 or 3 of the bosses of the 5 families of the mafia in New York. And this was not just a casual relationship. Roy Cohn was an emissary from the underworld to these more respectable figures, whether that's George Steinbrenner, who owns the Yankees, or Donald Trump, who much has been made of the fact that Donald Trump built Trump Tower entirely out of concrete, without a steel frame. And that may not sound interesting or significant, except for the fact that concrete at that time in New York was controlled by a fixed bid club called the Concrete Club, sort of orchestrated by the 5 families, particularly by Fat Tony Salerno, street boss of the Genovese family, who the journalist Wayne Barrett, his sources insisted Trump met with Salerno to work out the concrete buys for that project at Roy Cohn's townhouse. So we're talking about direct links between the mafia and Donald Trump. and this goes back to Fred Trump, his father. I mean, journalists like Michael D'Antonio and Wayne Barrett wrote about this, that the mafia was partnered on some of the outer borough projects that Fred Trump built in the 50s. So interestingly, the victim in that was the Federal Housing Authority, which they soaked for overcharges. So we were left holding the bag on that one, you know.
That seems so out of character for the Trumps.
Right.
I mean, that's amazing. I did not know that was the case, and how direct that link was. It also sheds new light, I think, on some of Trump's connections to figures like Felix Seder, to Russian criminal operations, and in a sense, you know, his admiration of Vladimir Putin, or kind of enjoyment of him, can be explained in that way as well, going back that far to Russian, you know, money connections, or at the very least, maybe they didn't know each other at the time, but they're swimming in the same waters, basically.
Well, that's right. And I think a crucial connection point there, besides, you know, many of the things you could talk about from the Mueller report and all that, but something I find really interesting is the bank that Donald Trump turned to in the 90s was Deutsche Bank, which is, you know, I mean, I don't say this lightly, maybe one of the most nefarious banks on earth.
They take anybody's money, basically. That's their reputation, and they've been caught doing illegal things on criminals' behalf.
There's a great book about it, I think called Dark Towers, by a former New York Times editor on Deutsche Bank and how they do this. There was a great investigation on WNYC about this. And really, the issue here, not that it's ever been proved conclusively, is that it sure seems like Deutsche Bank, which has, I believe, continues to have a presence in Moscow, which is rare among Western banks, was aiding Russian gangsters and oligarchs in getting their money out of Russia, which they want to do for a variety of reasons. So while that is happening with Deutsche Bank, you also have Donald Trump relying on Deutsche Bank for these really mind-boggling loans, which he defaults on, which he should not be getting, right? To overpay for the Doral golf course in Florida, you know, to finance these projects that are never going to be profitable, including with guys like Felix Seder, who's a former mob-associated boiler room operator who turned snitch on them. Can we prove that it's Russian money being laundered through these projects? Not in those cases. They can, though, in Panama, of all places, where there's another deal. Donald Trump builds a project there. It really doesn't build it, actually. He's just licensing his name for it. It's going to be something for Ivanka to build or manage. She commits fraud. I mean, it's just like definitive. She's lying about.
Wait, his wife or the daughter?
It's easy to get confused on that point with her, but it is the daughter.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's going to be her little project to run. And that one, you can prove that there are Brazilian and Colombian partners involved clearly in the drug trade and in laundering drug profits involved in that. And Russian gangsters also laundering money in that project. And Reuters did a really good investigation of it. So you name it. I mean, this is, you know, from cradle to grave, Donald Trump's been involved in these kinds of international gangster activities.
That brings me to this curious comment from Mike Johnson a few weeks ago at this point in regard to the Epstein files. He walked this back, but yeah. My theory on this is what we call a limited hangout, because it may not be true in the Epstein case, but maybe what he said here is true in the case of what you're talking about here, Russian money laundering and Felix Seder. Just a theory, but here is what Mike Johnson said a few weeks ago.
And he's not saying that what Epstein did is a hoax. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant.
What? He tried to sneak that in there. He was an FBI informant.
Dan, I'm curious your reaction, but also if you can just tell people the type of person that is typically becomes an FBI informant. Like, is it because you win a patriotism contest?
It's when you're a Boy Scout. It's the top badge that you can earn.
I mean, let's look at it this way. An FBI informant of this sort is the lowest person in the underworld, right? So you're you're kind of the bad guy to the other bad guys, you know, and it's because you got caught for something, right? Look, I don't know if Donald Trump ever informed on anyone to the FBI. All I know is until relatively recently, he was never a convicted felon.
100%, and you just laid out all of the illegal activities that he was participating in. It would make sense.
So, I mean, look, we do have a culture of impunity. I know that we never punish any rich guys, but you know, I mean, Wayne Barrett had him on mail and wire fraud, I think like in the 70s or 80s on this property on the west side of Manhattan. So anyone who wanted to prosecute him could have and should have years ago. I think it's probably a mix of influence and just inertia that, you know, these guys never seem to go to prison.
It is just interesting, though. I mean, because when we're talking about the mafia and the mob, that was a very common practice of creating FBI informants, I believe. Although you're the expert here, Dan, I should maybe ask that as a question, because that would be a part of the theme here.
Peter Thiel is, I believe, confirmed to have been an FBI informant. So this is not, it is not implausible by any means. And I will say another thing, you know, to take an example from Boston of Whitey Bulger. You know, Whitey Bulger, the Boston mob boss, Irish mob boss, revealed to be an FBI informant for decades. I mean, why did he do that? He did that to get rid of the Cosa Nostra in Boston and Providence. He did that to eliminate his rivals who were going to eliminate him eventually. So is that really above Donald Trump? I'm speculating here, but you know, I would not be shocked, you know, that he shopped other rivals.
Absolutely. So when you're looking at like this new kind of criminal economy in the modern age, involving a lot of crypto, involving shady money from overseas, like, what stands out to you as like a unique feature of it, and like in keeping with the theme of Trump kind of using and absorbing mafioso tactics? I mean, the tariffs are a number one thing that we could also like talk about in his presidency. Right. He's using that like a shakedown.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And the one that's been on my mind, you know, the most recently that I think is really interesting is what he's been doing to the colleges and universities and now TV networks, right? Which is a protection racket. And, you know, what is the logic of a protection racket? Everyone knows, all right, you pay the gangsters such and such money, or we throw a brick through your window, right? But I think it's actually more complicated than that. The best definition I've heard of a mafia is an organization that sells protection. That is essentially like a state within a state and its own kind of government. And what I find so interesting about Trump, not just with the tariffs, you know, but also with the universities and stuff, he's often doing it in that way. He's not using the full power of the state. He's almost using his own personal power to do this. It's interesting, considering he's the president, that he wouldn't appeal to that rather than his own sort of loyalty and acolytes, you know. And I find that very mob-like, right? And that what he's doing to these universities is doing essentially a protection racket, where if you pay the racket, you're not just paying the money. That's half of it. You're also conceding the idea he has the right to ask that from you. And I think that is even more valuable in a sense, because he doesn't have the right to ask that, but he does if you grant it. You know, this is so unprecedented. And because you've conceded that, you're never getting out now. The guys who paid, the deal with extortion like this is once you pay, you're never getting out. You think you can escape now? It's not happening. The guys who don't pay, whatever short-term costs they bear are worth it to not be in that guy's pocket.
And he's doing it with corporations in the United States too. And he rewards them. Like in this, we opened the show speaking about the TV conglomerate, the local TV conglomerate Nexstar, making this call on Jimmy Kimmel, right, as almost like a tribute to the Mafia Don. president, a show of faith. And in turn, basically, they are rewarding them by reportedly obliterating like FCC anti-monopoly guidelines to allow for this merger with their biggest rival. And then it would comprise a monopolistic takeover of 80% of local TV stations.
I mean, it just is so clear what's happening here, which is, there is, a big premise of our podcast is there is no line between legitimate and illegitimate business, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just this murk. And if we look at, the kind of countries that mafias thrive best in are sort of partial democracies. They're not full-on autocracies. They're not very healthy, clean democracies. They're ones with a mix of those characteristics. And so I think we're in one of those. It sure seems like, because the awarding of government contracts and of the goodies to a favored few. This is just a much larger version of that concrete club in New York I was talking about, where it's just 8 concrete contractors. That's who you have to buy from. Those are the only guys you can buy from. And by the way, you're going to pay an inflated cost for low quality stuff, but you have no other choice.
And it also incentivize, this monopoly stuff and like taking his hands off the wheel of anti-monopoly law is also too about consolidating power in the hands of people that are nice to him and suck up to him.
Well,
so it's the only show in town.
Who's getting TikTok, right? It is David Sachs, Mark Andreessen. These are double dealing guys who are just his cronies. This is just the modern day version of, Mayor Daley steering all the insurance business in the city to his son's firms. This is, and we could talk about Don Jr. and Eric, playing an important role in this too.
We didn't even get to the cryptocurrency piece of this racket.
Right. Literally, it reminds me of that scam from Mayor Daley or Senator Al D'Amato of New York. All business would go through his brother. This is a common tactic in mob-corrupted politicians. But now we're just doing it with whoever wants to dump money in the coffers of the Trump family. In this case, I think the United Arab Emirates, there was that great story in the New York Times about $2 billion in cryptocurrency purchases going straight to these Trump companies in exchange for these AI chips. That's just as clear a pay to play as you could find,
How do you view the the tech mafioso types and comparing that to, the golden age of the mafia when they were at their heights?
A lot less cool. No.
Yeah, they're not going to be making, movies or shows like The Sopranos.
Way
about
less fashionable.
These guys. Yeah. Although they are making The Social Network too, and I saw Ike Barinholtz is, I believe, playing Elon Musk. I think that was him. Maybe not. And it's going to work, I think. He kind of looks and sounds like him. But
no, that's great casting. Listen, in all seriousness, at least the mafia would tip a lot when they go out. I don't think these guys are glad handing everyone with a 50 when they walk around, I think in all seriousness, look, I despise the mafia. I do think with organized crime back in those days, there was an expectation at least that if you're in that life, there's a strong probability you're going to be killed or go to prison. And that did color a lot of their behavior, in how they had to live. What's really scary about these guys to me is I think that they think that there will never be any repercussions for anything they do. And that they're close to getting it to a place where they're running everything, where there is this kind of tech autocracy that maybe isn't so outlandish to imagine happening, and that's really scary. But, but we can also take heart from, Italy of a few decades ago was really, 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 racked by violence, and the Cosa Nostra seemed just an implacable fact of life. And it was dismantled in large part. Now, there are other problems in Italy still, other mafias that are powerful in Italy still, but the Cosa Nostra is a shell of itself in Sicily. And as one of the main prosecutors on that said, you know, the mafia has a beginning, it has a middle, it can have an end. So I try to turn to that when I feel really despairing about stuff like that.
Well, it underscores why we need to prosecute. I mean, we need to prosecute these Trump people. We need to. I mean, once God help us if we get power back, this is a result of impunity. And it's impunity, in my view, that started with the Iraq War, with letting those guys off the hook, with letting Wall Street off the hook. I mean, when you talk about there being not as much of a distinction as people would like to think between organized crime and just like regular capitalism, that's a prime example of it for me. It incentivizes criminal behavior from the top down.
I think it's why things like prosecuting insider trading or these relatively minor crimes are so important, because they are kind of speed bumps on worse behavior. And the fact that Donald Trump never had any of those is an outrage and is directly linked to what we have now. I mean, you know, again, Al Capone, famously, they got him on tax evasion charges, right? It turned out you had to pay taxes on illegally earned income. Which is kind of funny, you know? You know, and that actually brings us to another important point, I think, which is taxation is a really important part of this, of solving this dilemma. That these guys need to pay a lot more in taxes for a lot of democratic reasons, not even criminal ones, you know?
Exactly. And I guess, could you shed light on like the dynamic of or the organized crime, you know, kind of these informal economies that are created, and they were, you know, the Irish mafia too. I mean, there was also Jewish mafias, like newer immigrant groups that came into the United States more at the start of the 20th century, were subjected to, you know, racist immigration laws as well, and were discriminated against. And then you create these informal economies almost. Like, I mean, in many ways, it's hard not to view like Israel a little bit as an outgrowth of a little bit of a group that got empowered in many ways by the military-industrial complex here in the United States, and we built that up. But you also have the Italian mob and the Irish mob. That is the natural kind of, it seems like, outgrowth of gatekeeping capital and the economy for racist ends. That always is going to be the case, and you can see that in gang activity or whatever in the United States with other groups that are discriminated against.
Yeah, I mean, look, I essentially view, you know, the signers of the framers of the Constitution as, you know, the first mob summit, really. I mean, this is all the big shots from each area of the country coming together, like in the Godfather, where they're all assembled there. Later immigrant groups will scramble to get the best things that are available to them, right? Because they're locked out of that Boston Brahmin high-level control of things, right?
Yep.
So the Irish, you know, obviously I mean, I'm O'Sullivan. This is where I come from. And my grandparents came relatively late in the 1950s, but a century before, they're coming to escape the famine. And what do? They get the urban political machines. They get basically the next best thing, right? They get the civil service of cities. And that brings immense amounts of power. And they are essentially gangsters, right? Jews increasingly emigrate to the U.S. after the assassination of the Tsar in like 1880 or 81. And they get some of the next best things, obviously anti-Semitism, extremely strong. And then Italians, by the time they come in more towards the turn of the century, there's not as much left for Jews and Italians. And, you know, you have cases of extortion within the Italian community that's called the Black Hand commonly. You know, you have this criminality that is hard to penetrate, and it eventually metastasizes into this marriage of the Cosa Nostra and some of the other mafias from Italy and American business, right? I mean, this is explicitly what Lucky Luciano and what his mentors modeled themselves on. Guys like Andrew Carnegie and JP Morgan, running it like a business. And that's how they built it.
I mean, bring up Lucky Luciano. We have an IM. Maddie Moron says the Meyer Lansky organized criminal syndicate was also instrumental in the early wars of Zionist conquest during the founding of Israel, which I had kind of forgotten about. Yeah,
that's an interesting thing too. Yeah, Mickey Cohen, the mob boss in Los Angeles, also sent money to the Yishuv in Israel. So that Israel today is interesting. A lot of definitely, I mean, that's the understatement of the year, but, a lot of Russian language criminals with partial Jewish heritage have used the right of return to get an Israeli passport, sometimes live there. And so, it's a great, great way to move through these international circuits, with some latitude.
Well, really fascinating stuff, Dan. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I can't wait to check out more of your show, The Outfit, podcast about organized crime and how it explains America even more after our interview. I hope everybody checks it out. And we will put a link to it down below wherever people are listening to or watching this. Dan, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great fun.
And it's on YouTube too, right, Dan?
It is on YouTube as well, and anywhere podcasts are found, in fact.
Oh, very nice.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.